lot of people still walking around on this planet Earth because of people like this that come and donate their boats and their time and their money, and thank God for them.
Nice fish, bro!
Ladies and gentlemen,
I like that.
They're all handmade.
ladies and gentlemen, we're now going to give you
Shark Attack. It's a chocolate cupcake, milk chocolate ganache filling.
Introduce myself as a cancer ninja. I like saying ninja for two reasons. One, because my son then gets to go to school and say that his mom is a ninja, which is awesome. And two, because I really don't feel like my cancer journey is over, and I feel like it keeps going. And so Survivor kind of implies that it's in the past. And so now I'm going to share with you my story, hopefully quickly. I promised Scott I wouldn't go too long, but I could take up the rest of the night, so I'm going to avoid that. So I'm going to bring you all back to January 6th, 1996. We're in Buffalo, New York, and I am Buffalo. And we are, I'm at figure skating, and I keep trying the same jump routine, and I kept falling, and I was having trouble getting up. The falling part was normal. I was a horrible figure skater, which is why I eventually became a hockey player. But the hard getting up part was not normal. And so my mom and dad took me to the hospital, or excuse me, to the pediatrician's office, and they sent me for blood tests because I had just been diagnosed with laryngitis about a month prior. So I went home, waited for the blood test, and about 4 hours later I got a call. My parents said, oh, we have to go to the doctor's. But what I found out is that we weren't going to the doctor's, we were going to the emergency room. And I got to the emergency room, and it was filled with kids with all sorts of ailments. Someone was on a stretcher, kids were bleeding, and I cut the whole line. They were waiting for me, and I knew that wasn't a good thing. So I went through more testing, I had more blood tests, chest x-rays, and by the end of the night I had a diagnosis. I had cancer, specifically acute myeloid leukemia. And most kids that have leukemia don't have what I had. I had the kind that adults had, which was pretty rare. So early Monday morning, there was a huge snowstorm, of course, it's Buffalo. And instead of missing school and going sledding with my friends, I was heading to the hospital. I had a bunch of tests done, I had surgery, and I started chemo. And 10 days later, I was allowed to go home. It was pretty rough. I remember when it was time to go home, they said you have to shower and you have to eat and you have to drink something. And when I went to shower, I looked at myself in the mirror and I couldn't recognize myself. I'd been laying in bed for 10 days and I hadn't eaten anything, and I had been vomiting so much that my entire eye was red. But I went home, I made it, I passed all the tests, and then I spent the next month in and out of the hospital. And a month later I went in for another round of chemo, and at that point my doctors approached me with a decision that we had to make. I either needed to continue on chemo with a high chance of relapse, or I needed to get a bone marrow transplant. Now this was 20 years ago, and bone marrow transplants were relatively new. There had only been 2 other pediatric bone marrow transplants at that transplant center. Now I was fortunate enough that my brother, my only brother, turned out to be a match. And there's only about a 30% chance of that happening. So we're trying to figure out what makes sense. And we went for it. We decided we would go and I would have a bone marrow transplant. So that's exactly what I did in April. I had full body radiation, chemo, and went on to have a transplant. And spent about a month in the hospital. And I don't remember much of that time. I was heavily sedated. My mouth and throat were covered in sores, and I was vomiting pretty regularly. But at the end of that month, I was allowed to leave my room and I got to go home, which was awesome. I got to hang out with my brother and my dog. With that being said, every day I was coming back into the hospital. I was there for about 6 hours. I was getting infusions. I was taking 64 pills a day. But it all seemed good because I could sleep in my bed at night. But that wasn't very long. A week later, I ended up getting diagnosed with acute graft versus host disease, which is when your body starts fighting the transplant. When I was admitted, my blood pressure was rapidly decreasing, and so my doctors knew they needed to do something fast, and so they quickly increased my immunosuppressants. And after about maybe 4 or 5 days, we started winning the war on the graft versus host disease. But what we didn't realize is in doing that, I ended up with a fair amount of drug toxicity, and I started having a lot of seizures. I started out with minor seizures and then had grand mal seizures. So again, I ended up sedated for a few more weeks. And I was actually just talking to my mom before I came here, and she was like, don't tell the bathroom story. But I'm going to tell the bathroom story because I think it really illustrates just how hard it is to be a kid and a parent of a kid with cancer. And so once the seizures started subsiding, my mom let me start walking around again in my room. And I went to the bathroom and did what I was supposed to do, and then had to wash my hands because there was a high infection concern. And so I was in there and she was like, what are you doing? And you know, most 12-year-old girls spend a fair amount of time in the bathroom, so it's not totally out of the norm, but I wasn't going anywhere, I was in the hospital. And so she, said, what are you doing? And I was like, I'm washing my hands. She said, well, what, just wash your hands? And I said, I'm trying, but I can't remember how to turn the water on. Now, needless to say, my physicians were amazing, pulled me out of it, and eventually, months later, on the anniversary of my diagnosis, I went back to school. And I didn't lose a day of school, really, because I spent the entire treatment time, the entire summer, working with my teachers to make sure that I was going to not lose a day with my classmates. So I graduated high school, I graduated college, where I met a handsome young man at the time. He's not young anymore. Who's now my husband, and it was pretty awesome because he agreed to marry me even though every single date I told him that he wasn't going to be able to father any children, which is also kind of crazy. So it is amazing that he married me. But we moved up to Vermont, and then Vermonters, this is great. And so we moved up to Vermont, and it wasn't long after that I found out I was pregnant. And so I baffled all the doctors. They weren't quite sure how that happened. I explained a little bit to them, but it is the maple syrup. But at that point point I had a kid, and all of a sudden I realized, I want to be back. I want to be doing something to fight cancer because I don't want him to have to go through what I went through. So I moved the whole family from Vermont down to Boston. I started working at Dana-Farber doing cancer research for kids. And it was then that I learned about the Dana-Farber Marathon Challenge. I'm not a runner. I probably never will be, but I signed up to run. And my doctors were not happy with me. As a result of my treatment, my heart isn't great, my lungs aren't good, I don't have great kidneys, my bones, there's all sorts of side effects. But I said, I'm doing it, I'll take it easy, I'll run with a tutu, I promise it won't be bad. So I did that, and at the end of the first year, and I say first because there are more, I raised $23,000 for Dana-Farber, which was great, and I finished. So I kept going. I did it for 3 more years. I had to take a break 1 year where I wasn't allowed to run, but I could fundraise because I found out that I was definitely not infertile and I was pregnant with twins. So that was a surprise. But at the end of every year, I would go in for my checkups. I had 10 different doctors at Dana-Farber, and they're all amazing, and each are responsible for some piece of me. I have dermatologists, endocrinologists, cardiologists, I have a ton of doctors, and they all do checkups, and every year we'd have a cancer scare or something. I had part of my nose pulled off, I had breast biopsies, thyroid biopsies, all sorts of things. But thankfully every year it was a scare and not the real thing. And that was until 2014. And in 2014, after I was done running the marathon, I went in, they said, oh, we've got to biopsy this. And I said, okay, not a big deal, I'm used to this. But this time it turned out that it was a low-grade breast cancer. It was caused as a result of the treatment that I received for my leukemia. And I met with the radiation oncologist at Dana-Farber, and they said, we can't give you any more radiation. Your heart, it can't take it. That's not an option. And so then I went on to have a bilateral mastectomy. I didn't need any chemo, which was great. And as painful as the procedure might have been, it was really the knowledge that at that point I had a secondary cancer. And that was something we always knew was an option, but kind of hoped that it was never going to amount to anything. And it had. So I took the time to recover. And then this year, I decided that I was going to go for another marathon. And even though I hadn't been running or walking, I ran another marathon, well, more like walked, I would say, another marathon, and was able to bring the fundraising total for the last 5 years up to $97,000 for Dana-Farber. Cross the finish line with my son. It was funny because if anyone was on the finish line, you had to wait a long time to see me come through. But I was jogging and he was like sprinting, and I was yelling to him. I was like, Gus, slow down. And he was like, Mama, I am. This is my slow speed. And everyone was just laughing, and it was awesome. But the reason I wanted to share my fundraising is not because I want applause or recognition. It's because I genuinely believe that this is a great time for cancer research and for helping cancer patients, current and future. Having been a researcher, I know that we are more efficient now than ever. I have an enormous amount of faith that we are changing every single day what the future is going to look like. I'm hoping that kids that get diagnosed with what I have don't have to go through what I went through. Currently they still are, and currently they're still facing a 50% survival rate. But I think with all of our computer modeling and everything we're doing, we're really changing what the future looks like, and we're doing it quickly. And so with that, I just want to thank everyone here. This is amazing. I'm definitely coming next year, even if I'm not invited. Thank you on behalf of a mom who wants to protect her kids, and of a cancer survivor who, Ninja, who is hoping that, I've had my last cancer, but if I haven't, I have faith that you guys are going to help us get there. So thank you.
57.50 going once, 57.50 going twice, 57.50 going 3 times, 57.50. Let's gotta give a round of applause. 2 bedrooms, 6 has 3 bathrooms. Available May 29th, June 5th, 2017. Susan Goodwin has graciously donated this. What's it worth? Who showed up? Who cares?